Good afternoon. Welcome to our March monthly policy update. We'll get started just a moment. See people filtering in. We're glad to have you. We know there's a lot going on in the world and in Washington, D.C. right now. We have a lot to cover, so we do want to dive right in. Again, I want to welcome you to our March monthly policy update, which we're calling Seasons of Change. There's certainly a lot of change happening in the weather and in the trees here in DC and in the laws and regulations as well. I'm Ben Kirsch. I'm the Director of Public Policy and Government Relations here at IS. I'm joined today by Wes Coulomb, our trusted partner at Washington Counsel Ernst & Young, and by my independent sector government relations colleague, Travis Swanson. And a special treat, if you stay tuned, you will see our manager of policy research, Emily Rogers. If you're joining us for the very first time on an IS webinar, welcome. Independent Sector is a national membership organization of charities, foundations, and corporate giving programs working to ensure all people living in the United States thrive. This is a webinar, so your lines are muted. We encourage you to put questions in the Q&A box. Whenever they pop into your head, we will pause periodically to answer them. And you certainly are permitted to put general banter or other comments in the chat function. This is a member benefit for independent sector members, this monthly webinar. And if you're not a member yet, we're still glad to see you today. And if you want to stay part of this community, we hope you'll email membership@independentsector.org. Before we get started, I want to respectfully acknowledge I'm joining you today from Washington, D.C., as I mentioned, and it's the ancestral home of the Piscataway people. They're still in the area, working to reclaim their land and their traditional practice. Also, a lot of the places we inhabit in Washington were built by enslaved people. So again, wherever you're joining us from, welcome. We're so glad to have you, and we're grateful for your time and your work. As we began this month, we like to joke that March comes in like a lion, and again, it certainly did in the policymaking world. We had the spectacle of a presidential address to Congress, sometimes called a State of the Union. We had major appropriations fights and a lot of potential for tax legislation. We've seen major developments in all of those areas this month, and really grateful to be able to turn now to Wes Coulomb to give us an update on some of them. Hi, Wes. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, Ben. Good afternoon. Good to be with you. Well, kind of keep you up to speed on kind of what happened the last couple of weeks. The Senate and House did pass March 14th a full year CR to fund the federal government through the end of the fiscal year, September 30th. Obviously late, halfway through the year, but they did get it done on time before the March 14th deadline. That full year CR had various changes up and down in various categories. For the most part, it did plus up a bit in funds compared to FY 2024 on the defense, homeland security side, but overall cut about $13 billion in non-discretionary, non-defense discretionary spending in various categories and various agencies, including it did not include any of the community projects or earmarks of last year's, given it was a full year CR. However, I think they understand the appropriations committees are hearing and receiving and looking at the community projects again for FY 2026 process as the appropriation season gets going for next fiscal year. That was done, as you saw, with much concern amongst Democrats wanting to hold it up. At the end of the day, it passed through the House on a basically a partisan Republican-only basis, and then a bipartisan basis in the Senate, with Senator Schumer and others agreeing to put it forward to avoid a government shutdown for this year. So that's kind of behind us. But now we're looking ahead to the FY 2026 appropriations process, which is now kind of already kicked off for the year. Two things need to happen, I think, for that to really get going. One is administration usually puts forward a budget Given the incoming administration, their first year, usually that comes late. I think I recall in 2017, it came in May. Usually the first term or the first year of administration, it comes late in the year. So we'll see what the Trump administration puts out, if they do put out a budget this year. And I'd imagine not to be a full budget like we've seen in past years, but given they're new, something more smaller and more modest in size, sometime potentially in the May timeframe. We'll see how that materializes. Obviously, the Senate and House are in the middle of doing a budget resolution, which does kind of lay out the parameters of the overall spending levels, then kick off the appropriations process. And so you have kind of competing budget resolutions in the House and the Senate. They've each passed their own respective budgets. The view now is trying to negotiate a final budget between the House and Senate Republicans they can pass, which is really the next 3-week process before they break for 2 weeks in the middle of April. To get that done the next couple of weeks, Senate Republicans have indicated they're going to take up the House passed budget that has obviously the budget numbers for appropriations, as well as reconciliation instructions for both spending and taxes and the debt limit as part of that reconciliation bill process there. Right now, they're kind of negotiating the levels of those spending targets and the tax cut targets for Senate Finance Committee and Ways and Means as part of that budget resolution. I think that they're likely to be able to get agreement on something the next 2 or 3 weeks before they break, and potentially pass it through the Senate, maybe through the House, but maybe at least through the Senate before they break for the recess in April. So that's kind of, I think, where things stands. Happy to kind of stop and answer any questions on the spending side, Ben, before we get more into the tax stuff if you want.
Thank you, Wes. We'll again invite folks to put questions into the Q&A function, ideally. So, Wes, one question for you. We heard Democrats saying that they weren't going to vote for anything that, kept the government funded unless it constrained the president and Elon Musk from cutting funding in a way that, Democrats and many judges have viewed as, outside the bounds of presidential power. But then they went forward with it. I know, right, you and I are in ties today. We spend a fair amount of time on the Hill. I know we weren't in the room when those decisions were made. Do you have any sense of, kind of what Democratic thinking was around that, and maybe, how it might impact how they're going to think about FY26 appropriations?
Yeah, good question. I mean, there was meetings up in the February, early March timeframe about getting to a top line agreement on a bipartisan basis and moving the appropriations package. But in the day, the House decided to move forward with a more scaled back, cleaner full year CR and passed it late and tossed it over to the Senate, which really had Schumer and Thune had the choice of passing it as is, because the House did pass the bill, I think, on a Wednesday and then left town for the most part. And then on a Friday, it was a deadline. So the Senate, Democrats had really the choice of voting for it to move it through, or taking a stand and pushing back and daring them to shut the government down, or try to make changes and pass it back to the House if they did pass something modified it, send it back. And so they were in a tough spot. And I think the view was that shutting down the government was the worst option, in the sense it would give the administration and Elon Musk and the Doge crowd more power and authority to do more to cut government spending and not less. And so the call was made to pass it, even though it wasn't ideal from a Democrat standpoint.
So last question that I have before we move on to tax stuff. There was also a big, crisis about the Washington, D.C. budget at the last minute.
Yep.
And, ideas that needed to get fixed before this bill could get passed. Can you give folks a quick update on that?
Yeah, they did pass as long with the CR a fix to replace about $1 billion in funding for DC to the Senate. I did not see it. As I said, the House left and was out, and so they just got back, this week. And so I have not seen the House looking to take that up. But since it passed the Senate, that would be the place for it to get taken care of. And I'm not sure where that stands. I would imagine the House Republicans are not eager to take that up, given it would go back to what they had on their budget. But maybe there's an effort to push that through in the House.
Thanks, Wes. Uh, that's certainly an issue that I know some folks are continuing to track closely. We saw Senator Susan Collins indicate that President Trump supported that fix.
Yep.
I don't know that anyone has seen it from him directly, and that certainly seems like that House Republicans may need to see that in order to move that fix forward to allow DC to spend its own money at a balanced budget. Again, we noted that tax legislation is it's being worked on behind the scenes, being advocated in public, sort of stuck waiting behind a budget resolution, but there's a lot of work going on. Wes, can you give us a quick update there?
Yeah, so the Republicans are trying to kind of push through several different priorities of the president's in one, big package. Additional spending for defense, more spending for homeland security and the border, and then some energy policies, and then a reconciliation instruction to try to extend the 2017 tax cuts that expire at the end of 2025, and then finally an increase in the debt limit. And so all those, buckets are included in the budget resolution. In order for them to pass a reconciliation bill, which basically is the vehicle to pass legislation on a simple majority vote in the House and the Senate, which both Democrats and Republicans have used in past years for tax legislation and mandatory spending provisions, that needs to be done through reconciliation and done first through a budget resolution that passes both the House and the Senate. Right now, that resolution, as I said, has passed the House and passed the Senate in different versions. They're looking towards the House version as the one they kind of take up in the Senate to modify and then send back to the House for final passage and final vote. And right now, they're kind of negotiating over a couple pieces. One, the Senate folks want a little bit more increase in defense and homeland security spending that was in the House resolution. They're talking about maybe not so deep spending cuts as were in the House resolution, between 1.5 and 2 trillion was in the House resolution. That's a little bit steep for some Republicans, moderate Republicans in the Senate, get their votes. And then third is the tax cut portion, about $4 to $4.5 trillion in deficit increase to accommodate the extension of the tax cuts that expire into this year. They're also debating whether they can, change the policy baseline. This gets a little wonky, but the Republicans in the Senate want to go to a current policy baseline versus a current law baseline, which would then, under that current policy baseline, assumes that the current policy or current provisions in place that expire would be extended on a permanent basis beyond 2025, and therefore a piece of legislation to extend them wouldn't have a budget score or cost. Obviously, in real life, it would have a cost, but for budget purposes, it would not have a score, and therefore make it easier to pass the legislation through the House and the Senate. The parliamentarian is the one who decides whether that's allowable or not, and thus the Republicans and Democrats are meeting with her this next week or two to see if they can get an answer, a ruling on that, see if it's allowable to be included as part of reconciliation going forward. If they don't get that, then I would imagine they're going to go back to the construct in the House budget that has roughly $4 trillion in deficit increase to accommodate a long-term extension of the tax cuts, probably not, certainly not permanent, and probably somewhere in the 8 to 10 year period for the extension, as well as other provisions in there. Really, the debate is around how much can they do in that $4 trillion bucket, and if they want to do more things, including things the president has put on the table, such as no tax on tips, no tax on overtime pay, and so forth, then they would have to basically raise additional revenue with tax increases to help offset that amount, right? So you could do a $5 trillion tax cut and make $1 trillion of tax increases to bring it down to a net tax cut of $4 trillion and still meet the rules under reconciliation. So that's kind of what they're looking at, is what room they have to negotiate a tax bill. And also they need a lot of offsets to help pay for some of the things and what have you. So that's kind of what we're watching, what happens there on the offset side, if they're going to dig deep and trying to, spread the pain around to various industries, various groups, and who's going to be in the crosshairs of that is something that we're watching very closely.
Thank you, Wes. And so we will invite questions on that. I want to emphasize, I think, two key things here. As much as I will admit, I do love the budget wonkery of reconciliation instructions and what Robert Byrd really meant with the Byrd rule as the parliamentarian tries to interpret things. I think that this discussion about permanency is really important to the charitable sector for two key reasons. One is, as Wes noted, that if they have a set amount of money that they can spend and more things that they want to spend it on, they will go hunting for revenue. And House Republicans on the Budget Committee have identified a number of ways publicly, perhaps accidentally publicly, that they could raise revenue from the charitable sector. Things like ending the deductibility of contributions to healthcare organizations, or increasing the university endowment excise tax rate. These are all things that were just floated, so we don't want to spend too much time on them right here. But this quest for permanence could lead to an even larger need for tax writers to find revenue. And so that's one reason why we're paying attention to this current policy baseline and the ruling of the parliamentarian. The other one is just, not to spend too much time on history, but the reason why we have this moment of tax policy that, again, some folks even nerdier than us have called the tax Super Bowl, is because of what happened in 2017, the last time Republicans had control of Congress and wrote a large-scale tax bill. They only had enough money in their allocation to cut taxes for individuals for a certain period of time. And when those expired, it brings us back to the situation we're in now, where the whole tax code is up for debate. If these are restored, if these tax cuts are extended permanently, then it means that further down the line, there will be fewer bites at the apple for not just charitable sector advocates, but for everyone who works in the tax space. So again, I just want to emphasize that we see real tangible reasons why tracking permanency is important to people who have a stake in the future of the nonprofit sector. All right, I'll get off my soapbox because we do have a question. So we have a question about the prospects for the tax bill, including a proposal to eliminate the tax exemption for state and local bonds as a proposed pay for. So I believe, Wes, this is an item that showed up on the Budget Committee list. I don't have a great sense of the tea leaves on this one. Do you?
Yeah, I think that would be very low probability of happening. Finance, state and local governments are very dependent on municipal bonds. That would be a big disruption in the marketplace and their ability to finance their capital expenditures. There was more targeted proposals in 2017 in the House bill, for example, to get rid of private activity bonds, which is a segment of the overall municipal bond market that did not get included in the final bill. There was a proposal to repeal advance refunding of municipal bonds that did make it into law in 2017. But I think that going all the way to getting rid of municipal bonds generally across the board is very unlikely or disruptive to the state local market.
Thanks, Wes.
Yeah, sure.
Like a lot of things, we might feel that the comprehensive proposal to eliminate that is probably beyond expectations, but that there could be efforts to do smaller versions of that. I mean, we've seen this with another item on the budget committee's list to eliminate nonprofit hospitals tax exempt status. That is a proposal that's been out there for a while, and would certainly face some strenuous opposition, but could there be other changes in that space? We don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's, to your point earlier, man, there's no question there's a hunt for, offsets to be able to pay for all the things they have on their, want to do list, which is, large and growing, especially if you add on to the 2017 expirations, all the things that President Trump has thrown out in the campaign and he's asked Congress to do. So those are expensive. They cost revenue. That's going to put pressure on them to find revenue elsewhere, like from very different sources, to raise revenue to do it. So we're definitely kind of watching that space very closely. Just one thing I didn't mention was timing wise, if they do pass the budget resolution the next 3 weeks, the House and the Senate, then I think they're off to the races on actually drafting a tax bill in Ways and Means and Finance when they come back in the post recess period in the end of April, first part of May. And then, given they have to pass it to the committees, into the Senate full House and the full Senate, I'd imagine both the House and Senate bills will be different. We'll have to reconcile that in a conference, then go back to the House and Senate for a final vote, which I think is going to stretch into the summer, June, July timeframe. I think most people think that's kind of where this ends up going. Although they'll try to move quickly when they get the right instructions done, but it'll take some time to put the bill together because, as I mentioned, it's going to include both spending cuts and the tax provisions together in one package, which provides for lots of moving pieces and difficult conversations to get the votes in a narrowly divided House and Senate.
Yes. Yeah, lots to get done. With Congress on timing, always bet the over, and the public pronouncements from leadership are still late May. So there you have it. So in addition to these big picture issues on spending and taxes that impact the whole nation, and absolutely the charitable sector, there's some other issues that have come up over the past month that have sort of a more direct impact on the charitable sector. And I'm really glad to have Travis Swanson, Government Relations Manager at IS, here to report out on a few of those issues. So Travis, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Wes, for your update too. Unlike Ben and Wes, you don't get me in a tie today because I was on the Hill yesterday, not today. So I just have a few updates. Earlier this month, the president signed an executive order aimed at excluding nonprofits that participate in so-called illegal activities, specifically those who assist undocumented immigrants from participation in the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. This is the program that will forgive a borrower's loans after 120 payments in 120 months, so 10 years of service in an eligible employer, which includes 501c3s. To be clear, PSLF was established by Congress in 2007, and the law that was passed with broad bipartisan support and signed by President Bush explicitly states that all 501c3 nonprofits qualify as eligible employers. If a nonprofit is truly engaging in illegal activities, there are existing legal processes for revoking its 501c3 status and thus ending their qualification for PSLF. This executive order undermines that framework and the intent of the bipartisan 2007 law, as well as sets a dangerous precedent. PSLF is a critical tool for recruiting and retaining talent in the nonprofit sector, and limiting access based on political motives and motivations weakens the entire field, making it harder to retain these dedicated professionals to continue their service in our sector. This is why IS has been publicly opposing this executive order, and we have remained committed to fighting for a strong, accessible PSLF program for all who meet their requirements and put in those 120 months and should be qualifying for the program. You may have seen too recently, just another update on PSLF. The income-driven repayment plan applications have been pulled offline for several months. Those did go back online this month. I was informed yesterday at a coalition meeting. However, it's not clear that those applications are actually being processed at this time. So the applications are online. We don't know that they're being processed, but being in one of these eligible repayment plans is another one of those qualifications for checking off those boxes to meeting those 120 months. So there are some steps to restoring that, but that's kind of where that is right now. So kind of a lot of balls in the air on PSLF, but it is something we're continuing to monitor. On March 5th, Congresswoman Terry Sewell, a Democrat of Alabama, reintroduced the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. And this essential bill would restore and modernize protections of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, addressing today's voter suppression tactics and ensuring that every voter, no matter their race or background, has equal access to the ballot box. This bill is co-sponsored by every House Democrat and has the support of more than 140 organizations across the country. Given the current political landscape in Congress, it would be highly unlikely that we would see this bill receive a vote this year or even a markup in committee. And in the weeks following its introduction, the president signed an executive order imposing a new proof of citizenship requirement to vote in federal elections, which is problematic in a lot of ways. It's not clear that the president has the authority to sign something like that. And it'll also be problematic for a lot of Americans, considering your driver's license is not proof of citizenship. So a lot of Americans don't actually even possess a proof of citizenship. And when you pile on to that the president had signed an executive order attempting to end birthright citizenship, which is still hung up in the courts, I mean, that would mean that also even a birth certificate wouldn't necessarily be proof of citizenship at that point. So kind of a lot of problems with this. That same executive order also directs the Attorney General to prioritize enforcement of a longstanding law regarding lobbying by nonprofit organizations that receive federal funding. However, it was worded in a way that the order seems to say that that nonprofits can't lobby at all, and that is not true. So to be very clear, the law that was referenced in this executive order does not ban you from lobbying if you're a nonprofit. It simply prohibits the use of federal dollars for your lobbying efforts. So if you receive $10,000 from federal government, you can't use that $10,000 to go lobby the government. But if you receive $10,000 from a donor, you can use that $10,000 for lobbying efforts. So you still can engage in lobbying. You still can engage in advocacy. You just need to not be using federal funds for that. And if you have more specific questions about, where your dollars are coming from, I'd recommend, talking to your finance teams, your general counsels at your organizations, if you have them, just to clear this up. But we just didn't want this confusion to kind of be lingering out in the world. At IS, we understand that we must continue to push back on policies pushing for policies that protect and expand voting rights, and we can't allow misinformation or potentially unlawful administrative actions to undermine that fight. And then lastly, last month, a bipartisan group of lawmakers reintroduced the Retirement Fairness for Charities and Educational Institutions Act. This legislation would expand investment options for 403B retirement plans. In the Senate, this bill is being led by Senators Katie Britt, a Republican of Alabama, Raphael Warnock, a Democrat of Georgia, Bill Cassidy, Republican of Louisiana, and Gary Peters, a Democrat of Michigan. And then in the House side, it's being led by Reps Frank Lucas, Josh Goffmeier, Andy Barr, and Bill Foster are leading the effort on the other side of the Capitol. This bill would allow 403B plans used by nonprofit and public sector employees to invest in collective investment trusts and insurance company separate accounts. So this would be kind of similar to what 401ks can already invest in. I know most people are familiar with 401ks. 403Bs are kind of a more public sector and nonprofit counterpart. They used to be, my understanding of the accounts is they used to be pretty different, but over the years, the laws have kind of changed and they're now a lot closer than they used to be, and this bill would bring them even closer together. So this all probably sounds super technical, but the impact is very simple. It would mean lower fees and better retirement savings outcomes for millions of workers at schools and nonprofits and other tax-exempt organizations who are providing their employees with these 403B retirement accounts. For too long, nonprofits and public sector employees have had fewer investment options than their private sector counterparts, making it harder to build a secure retirement. And by modernizing these 403(b) plans, this would give teachers and nonprofit staff and other public service workers access to more affordable and diversified investments while planning for their retirement. This bill obviously has strong bipartisan support. I just named a long list of Democrats and Republicans both who are leading this effort. And it just feels like this is very much a common sense step towards ensuring that those who are serving our communities can plan for their retirement and eventually retire with dignity. So those are all of the updates I have, Ben. And if anybody has any questions, I would be happy to take any.
Thank you, Travis. What's going on? So we will invite questions about public service loan forgiveness, about voting rights, about retirement options for nonprofit and government workers. We know there's a lot to track. And as a registrant for this webinar, you will also receive some follow-up links with additional information. So we promised you all a cameo appearance from Emily Rogers, right? Manager of Policy Research in Independent Sector. And Emily is not new to Independent Sector. This, we believe, is her world premiere on the monthly policy update. So Emily, thank you so much for joining us. Emily has an update on the 14th Annual Symposium on Public Policy for Nonprofits.
Thanks, Ben. It's very exciting to make my debut on the MPU. So our Symposium on Public Policy for Nonprofits is something that IS co-hosts with the Association for Research on Nonprofit Organizations and Voluntary Action and Nonprofit Policy Forum. So this is a virtual event designed to bring together researchers, practitioners, and policymakers to explore key questions and issues related to public policy affecting nonprofits and philanthropy. And we are now accepting proposals through May 2nd. And as you've heard here today, the stakes are incredibly high for the sector. We all know that the charitable sector makes an incredible impact. Research shows that Americans trust nonprofits more than the government, corporations, and the media. Yet nonprofits and philanthropy often struggle to convey their value to policymakers, the media, and the public. So this year, our theme is Breaking Through the Noise, Assessing and Communicating the Impact of Nonprofits and Philanthropy. And we want to dig into how nonprofits and philanthropy can better assess and communicate their specific contributions to our communities, and then increase the public, media, and government investment in their successes. So if you have research or practical experience in this area, please consider submitting a proposal. And this isn't just for researchers. A huge part of success of the symposium depends on bringing practitioners into these conversations. So if you have a case study or a strategy to share, this is a great opportunity to do so. I will post the link to the RFP in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. And if you're interested in attending the symposium, stay tuned. We'll be opening registration this summer, and the event is in September. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily. We look forward to your submissions and to seeing folks in September. We have a question in the chat about the Charitable Act. And thank you, Travis, for answering it. So for people who are not reading the bill in the Senate, that would provide a charitable deduction for every Americans up to 21 co-sponsors. Travis, anything else you wanted to add on that?
Just that we're making it, when Ben and I are up on the Hill and Wes, we do have conversations about the Charitable Act very frequently, and it is something that we are making sure are on the radar, particularly of Senate Finance Committee members and House Ways and Means Committee members. So when they're thinking about these tax reforms that Wes were talking about, that we're expecting that will be happening later this year, not that we're just expecting, but will be happening later this year, that to let them know that this is a priority for us, that we want to see the Charitable Act language potentially baked into those bills, so that it can advance potentially that way if we can't get the standalone bill to move. So lots of new co-sponsors have been signing on to the bill. There is a lot of opportunity to also reach out to your lawmakers if they're not on the bill to make sure that they get on the bill, that they have to know that this is a priority for you, for everyone. Otherwise, it's hard for them to gain interest because they're hearing from other people about other things.
Thank you, Travis. And I will say that everyone else in this nation seems to be up on Capitol Hill this week. So it's incumbent on us to make our voices heard. If you're an independent sector member and you are interested in joining Capitol Hill meetings, I want to make it clear that Travis leads a number of those on behalf of IS and its members. So if you're not getting invites to those, please reach out to us and let us know. We would love to include you on that invite list for those meetings. Absent any final questions about spending or taxes, student loans, voting, or the symposium on nonprofits and public policy, I want to thank you again for joining us this afternoon. There is so much going on in the world and in the policymaking space. Grateful to Wes and to Travis and to Emily. And again, most of all, grateful to all of you for joining us and for the work you do. Thanks again.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.